Ahora empieza su programa, el show del doctor Roy Aranda. Temas sobre los efectos que tiene la separación de los niños de sus padres, traumas que afrontan los indocumentados, violencia doméstica, el porqué de la violencia en las escuelas. Llámanos en vivo al 1-888-900-2811, extensión 6 y haz tus preguntas al aire. ¡Comenzamos!
Good evening, my dear viewers. Buenas noches, queridos televidentes. Disculpas de comenzar un poco tarde hoy. Apologies for starting a little bit late today. It is raining outside and things happen. De vez en cuando llueve y uno corre un poco con retraso. So, le pido disculpas. Tenemos un show que hoy va a ser en inglés. Today the show will be in English. Next week, la próxima semana va a ser completamente en español. Next week the show will be entirely in Spanish. La próxima semana tendremos como invitada a la doctora Cristina Vaglica. We'll have Dr. Cristina Vaglica next week. She is a psychiatrist, ella es psiquiatra. Y entre los dos, between the two of us, we're going to talk about a number of themes, a number of issues that affect people. Where there's a wonderful opportunity for collaboration between psychiatry and psychology. So, una colaboración entre psiquiatría y psicología, lo que vamos a tocar la próxima semana, reconociendo que a veces la gente sufre depresiones, ansiedades, nerviosismo, ataques de cólera, problemas de abuso de sustancias, many issues, depression, anxiety, and often there is a need not only for psychological intervention, but for medication, for psychiatric intervention as well. So eso será la próxima semana. Quería pues felicitar a todos los días de festivos, tanto para los judíos como para los cristianos. I wanted to extend my greetings to all viewers of the Jewish faith as well as Christian faith, who are celebrating major holidays at this point in time. Sadly, tristemente, este mundo, our world, is in mourning.
That's right.
After what happened at Sri Lanka. I mean, it's the biggest horrific terrorist attack since 9/11. And towards that end, I was really, really motivated because I'm looking around me, and it seems to me that that this whole world seems to be infected with this violence bug. And from out of nowhere, we're seeing violence in Sri Lanka, in New Zealand, in the United States, in France, England.
Right.
Mention Germany, mention France, any place of the world, and I just don't know where this is going to end and what are some of the things that we can do. And I've been wrestling and struggling with concepts of violence and different aspects of violence, different contexts of violence, and how to deal with violence, how to cope with violence, seeking solutions. Many of those solutions are psychological, others are political, others involve the community coming to grips with violence, risk management models,
right.
Religious entities understanding and looking at what they can do to protect themselves, and also, of course, not the least of which are legal measures. So towards that end, and without further ado, I did want to mention that today's topic is coping with the many faces of prejudice and hate-biased crime. And I have as my invited guest someone I'm becoming very friendly with, an attorney, Jose Nieves.
Thank you for having me.
Who has a long background in working for the Attorney General's Office of the State of New York. You're also doing work, I believe, in Queens, and he is a candidate for the office of District Attorney of County of Queens. So I did want to welcome you and thank you for coming in this rainy weather today.
No problem. I appreciate being here.
Thank you, and please let the viewers know a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Jose Nieves. I'm a candidate for Queens District Attorney. The elections are June 25th in Queens County in New York City. I am a 18-year veteran prosecutor. I've prosecuted cases in the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office, the New York State Attorney General's Office. Also, I've prosecuted cases with the U.S. Attorney's Office, Northern District of New York, and the United States Army as a military prosecutor. I'm a proud combat veteran, served our military.
Thank you for serving our country.
Thank you.
I did want to give a shout out.
I've served our country for 10 years, 1 year in Afghanistan, and one of the things that I focus on is prosecutions of biased cases and also sexual assaults and harassment.
And on top of that, you were also exposed to PTSD and issues related to combat fatigue and all sorts of problems, which is another topic that we'll deal with on another occasion.
That's right. But hate crimes is really a major concern nationally and internationally, as you were pointing out in your introduction. But even in New York City, we've been having incidences on the rise of hate crimes.
Well, I did have some slides, and I wanted to at least start with some basic definitions, and by all means, feel free to chime in. Oscar, ¿me puede poner slide 1? I mixed it up, English and Spanish. I hope you're okay with that.
That's fine. I'm completely fine with that.
This gives an idea of what hate, it doesn't cover everything, but it's basically covering some hate crimes. Physical assaults, threatening phone calls. You don't actually have to have physical damage done. Hate mail. It can also be through the emails.
Absolutely.
Electronic. Acts of vandalism, destruction of property, and fire bombings. And me puede poner el slide 2. And bias-motivated crime pretty much pertains to an offender who's motivated by a particular characteristic of the victim as a member of belonging to a particular group. It's my understanding that there has to be an intent. So the intent has to be to create harm to this particular individual because of his or her belonging to that particular group.
The intent has to be to target the individual because of whatever ethnic, racial, gender, or other quality they have that is a protected class. Okay,
so certainly we're looking at this when we talk about the bombing of the synagogue in Pittsburgh.
Of course.
When we're talking about the bombings of the mosques in New Zealand and the horrific church bombings in Sri Lanka during just this past Sunday, on Easter Sunday.
Of course.
So obviously, clearly that fits a model for a hate crime.
Individuals being targeted in many instances because of their faith, and it's clear that that's why they're being targeted to be a victim. Okay.
I do want to give the viewer some sense of the statistics. So I'm going to give you just a brief oversight. Oscar, la siguiente slide. This by no means encompasses all these statistics that are extremely complex, but I thought I'd give you just a sampling of what some of the statistics are. I'm talking about fairly recent years. It's not necessarily not necessarily just last year, but it goes back maybe 2 or 3 years. A couple of recent statistics here. Hate crimes have been on the increase by 17%. Religion-based hate crimes that we were talking about increased 23%. Hate crimes against Jews rose 37%. Anti-Muslim hate crimes increased 99% between 2014 and 2016. And I'm pretty sure that following Sri Lanka, you're probably going to see some falling out there, which is what happened here after 9/11 as well. Hate crimes against Latinos, a majority of my viewers are Latinos, somos Hispanos. 40% increase in hate crimes over the past several years. And in California, I just wanted to give you the statistic for California, which is greater than the other states. Hate crimes against Latinos in California rose more than 50% since 2016. Put this like on a slide. I'm reasonably sure as well that the issues with the border that's taking place, it's sort of like right now, it would seem to me that the zeitgeist, the buzzwords that are most on people's lips, immigration, violence.
All right.
Seems to be wherever you go, it's either immigration or violence. You see in the news, turn on any news station, any of the local news stations, you're going to find something related to immigration, the southern border, something related to violence.
And if you listen to our president, there's actually a connection between the two, where the president makes a connection between immigration and violence, identifying new immigrants as members of the MS-13 gang and those new immigrants that come in, or individuals, approaching the United States as a horde of, intruders, invaders, bringing to the forefront of your mind a violent an invasion of the United States.
Well, I mean, there's no doubt that MS-13 is a violent, violent group, and that they are fairly enmeshed in many places in the United States. But I think we're looking at maybe 10,000 numbers. I mean, am I off?
If that,
somewhere in that area.
And that's nationally, right?
That's nationally.
I think if that, and
we're looking at 11 million undocumented, Latinos, and we're looking at 55 million Hispanics living in the United States.
So
and,
obviously, it's really not fair to say that Latinos are represented by this very small minority group of very violent individuals, and now we have to bear the brunt of their sins.
Okay. Me puede poner el siguiente slide. Slide 4 is going to show some of the most targeted groups, and this is a statistic from 2016.
Right.
At the top, African Americans, lesbians, gays, bisexuals, your LGBTQ, whites, who are certainly victims of being targeted, Jews, Latinos, and Muslims. These are the 6, and I'm not necessarily giving it to you in rank order, but these are the 6 most targeted groups. So what I wanted to do now is just open it up for discussion, because, what are some of the things, what are some of the concerns that you've seen, working as for the New York State Attorney General's office and in your practice as a prosecutor. And I know that we will be looking at later on towards the end of the second half of the program. We're going to be looking more at what steps can be taken. What are some of the possible things that we can do? Because obviously, looking at statistics, looking at what groups are targeted, this gives us some idea of the scope of the problem. It's part of an assessment that we need to take. Who do we need to look at? Who needs to be protected? Where do these people need to be protected? In what context do they need to be protected? It's clearly very context type of person as we see, what group specific. So, for instance, if you're looking at religious groups and you're looking at churches and mosques and synagogues, steps for them to take to protect themselves will be, to a large extent, some similarities, but also but different than protecting major sporting locations, Yankee Stadium, and the football events, the type of security that you need there, safeguarding huge, large malls, safeguarding multi-activity centers like Madison Square Garden, Nassau Coliseum, places where there are concerts, events that are out in the street. Also looking at particular days that may be at greater risk. We saw now Easter Sunday. Obviously, unfortunately, we are reaching a point in our lives that we want to celebrate Easter Sunday, we want to celebrate Passover, we want to celebrate Ramadan, which is around the corner. People need to worry about securing wherever their places of worship, and it didn't. I don't think it used to. It had to be that way. There's obviously a history behind this, but it looks.
There is.
It looks like it's increasing to me. Mm-hmm. Schools have to worry about whether or not you should arm teachers. We've had mass shootings and concerts.
Far too many.
So there's many different contexts. So what I wanted to really open it up. Solutions need to be like the location, who might be targeted, context, time of the year, time of the day, crowded locations, Times Square during New Year's Eve. What was there, like 500,000 people were there or more?
Easily.
There was security up the yin-yang.
Yeah. Which is necessary.
At Times
which
Square.
Is absolutely necessary.
And risks can happen no matter where you go. There's always going to be a risk. So I think that solution also from professional scientific standpoint, what characteristics do offenders have? Is there any way that we can help by profiling them? Is there any way that steps can be taken psychologically also to remedy and to help victims? There has to be some psychological first aid and resilience and post traumatic growth that has to take place. But solutions are going to include politics, passing bills. Like right now, I know that New York State is looking at a number of suicide prevention bills actively. And I think that that's important. So the politicians, they'll pass the bill, then it's up to enforcement. And this is where you come in. And then you have police officers that are going to be out there, taking care of us. So take it away.
I think this is an incredibly important issue socially, but also in the campaign that I've seen as district attorney, because hate crimes have really concerned the public. We've had instances in Queens where individuals were attacked because they were Muslim, they were attacked because they were Jewish. It was faith-based violence, and I think that what we need to do is look at it from two perspectives, from two angles. One is the law enforcement angle, how, as you were saying, how do we protect the victims, how do we prosecute, investigate these cases, but the other angle has to be in an information angle. How do we inform the public as to what's going on?
The educational component.
How do we educate the public on what it is that we need to look for, the red flags, the signals that something might be about to happen, or that individuals are preparing for engaging in some type of race-based or religion-based violence or anything like that. And I think it's important.
They blew it in Florida.
They absolutely did, and it's very sad to see when we don't identify.
Well, in Sri Lanka, there's indications that they blew it there too.
And I think the thing that law enforcement has to do is start acknowledging that there are groups in our society that are hell-bent on committing violence, and committing violence based on character traits that they find to be offensive, character traits that they want to target individual, whether it be religion, whether it be sexual orientation, whether it be race. And we have to get serious about looking into those groups and investigating those groups as well as we investigate drug runners and gun runners and and human traffickers. We have to conduct these investigations.
Sort of like cells, sort of
exactly.
like, and I mean cells. I don't mean that in
almost a criminal enterprise
in a movie context. I mean cells in terms of identifying groups of people that are ganging or getting together, and that they have certain symbols and certain characteristics and certain activities. I know that when I was younger, there were gangs. I mean,
and there are gangs now.
There were gangs then, and I'm sure there are certainly gangs now.
And you want to identify the group that's engaging in this type of violence, because you'll see that they're engaging in other criminal activity. 9 times out of 10, they are engaging in other criminal activities that we can use in our investigation to identify various charges and how we can bring them to justice before they commit an atrocity like killing multiple people in a church or hurting individuals, in our society. And I think those investigations have to be more proactive instead of reactive. And that's the law enforcement aspect of it.
You mean don't wait for something to happen to intervene.
Can't wait.
But at least try to do something. And I know that there's law enforcement that team up with mental health when there's somebody who's been identified potentially as at risk. They'll make a home visit. They'll talk to a teacher, to an employer. They'll do a little bit of intervention ahead of time, and that's not waiting for something to happen. And I'm reasonably sure, because we obviously hear about the incidents that happen. What we don't hear, and I'm not entirely sure how we could, I don't quite know how we could even document it or come up with reasonable statistics. We don't hear about non-incidents. We don't hear about the many, I'm sure many successful interventions where law enforcement, the community, see something, say something, by people making phone calls, something that prevented an incident from happening. And I don't think we really know this. It's not like somebody's going to come up and say, by the way, I was planning to do this.
They don't do papers on that. They don't do articles on that, because that information, unfortunately, because nothing is resulted, becomes hidden in the courthouses.
But then when you hear that the statistics are relatively remaining the same and or getting worse, it doesn't take, and therefore a conclusion is made that the interventions have failed. I'm not sure that I can accept that, and the reason that I don't think I can accept that is because we don't know the non-incidents. And if you're telling me that you have schools that now are locking all doors except for a main door, have security posted, have cameras, have lights that work, have debris clear from the premises, have security inside and outside patrolling every now and then, have procedures inside where if you see somebody doesn't belong there, you open up your mouth and you say something. I can't believe that with all of those and apps that immediately will call the police, that it's not effective. So I have to believe that we're seeing that we have more non-incidents. We just don't quite know how to report that.
And from a law enforcement perspective, the way you could prevent crime is if you try to get to the criminal actor before they engage in the activity, before in the planning stages. And we can do that. We can infiltrate certain groups like white supremacists, for instance, infiltrate them, monitor them, and then build cases on the individual members before they go out and commit an act of violence, before they go out and commit an atrocity. And that's what I'm saying from the law enforcement side of the house, to try to be more proactive and engage in these investigations. We know where the groups are. We can identify them. We can identify the members through online chat groups, through blogs. They can be identified. And then once we do that, we have the investigations to make sure that we're doing everything we can to prevent a race-based or a religion-based violence or death.
How important is it for local law enforcement to try to maintain, stimulate, encourage open dialogue with schools, with churches, with synagogues, with mosques, come out to give talks, certainly to the children, to be safe from strangers who tell them to approach their car, little things, little things like that. But I'm also, obviously we've seen a lot of that in terms of teaching children with an eye towards preventing sex crimes and abductions. But I'm talking here in terms of violent acts. Having an opportunity to be invited to a school, to have friendly cooperation with between law enforcement and these other agencies? How important do you see that as a a step?
It's the other side of the coin, and it's the other side of the what we have to look at. The other angle that I said was education, trying to educate the public, trying to educate our community on how to self-identify and identify risk, high-risk activities, high-risk behavior that's engaging in targeting individuals based on what they look like, based on how they pray, and we have to be able to identify that. And law enforcement, for instance, the New York City Police Department, to their credit, they're engaging in that type of training within their department called implicit bias training, where they identify biases in their own perspective, and we all walk around with biases, right? And they do that, and you can go around and teach other people that it's okay to have biases, but you have to be careful to identify when those biases are extended into hate and hate speech and hate activity and targeting individuals for violence. And then that type of education is what's necessary. And that's first you open up the dialogue on bias, implicit biases, and then you graduate it to, and this is what happens when biases are taken to the extreme, where it becomes more than it's an implicit bias, but a hatred of an individual based on the characteristic of that person and the targeting of them for violence. And I think that's the education we need.
I know that after the Easter bombing in Sri Lanka, I live in Long Island, and I was watching mortified, horrified, the news, but I also heard how in Nassau County and Suffolk County, I live in Suffolk, they were taking heightened security and monitoring of religious facilities. Is that something that was taking place also in the 5 boroughs?
Yeah, in the 5 boroughs. And whenever there's an attack like that, you definitely want to step up security on sensitive areas, sensitive institutions such as churches, mosques, synagogues, and even schools and things of that nature, certain embassy offices. But the other part of the analysis has to be what happens when there's an incident, and that's another thing that we can do as law enforcement to educate and inform the public. When there is an incident to be there on day one, on the moment that it happens, right after it happens, to get in there, investigate, and share information. Distribute information to the public so that they're in the know, so that they understand that this is a problem. And they themselves can share information and begin the healing process. Because whenever there's an act of violence based on hate, there has to be a healing process in the community where they come together and they say, this is not tolerated. This type of behavior is not consistent with our values. But if the law enforcement and the district attorney's office is not proactive in investigating and being transparent and sharing information, that dialogue doesn't happen. You can facilitate that dialogue through law enforcement, through the DA's office, so long as you're able to engage in a very transparent investigation.
How much of a problem is it for law enforcement right after an incident when you have the mad rush of the news media?
Sure.
To report every little thing that goes on to the point that they're interviewing everybody under the sun. They're looking at social media. They'll interview somebody who'll say, well, this kid was bizarre. I knew he was bizarre. And before you know it, like everybody's thumb is in the pie. And you start wondering what's accurate, and then the information is repeated.
Right.
So it gets repeated and repeated and repeated. So it's erroneous,
yes,
false information, misinformation, prejudicial information that gets repeated, and through repetition seems to become truth. And then the public already forms their opinions about something, and they have difficulty later, I think, hearing what is actually being ferreted out. And I wonder how much of a problem is that? Because I know that law enforcement doesn't want to contaminate a crime scene, but I see this as a contamination that's much bigger than contaminating the crime scene.
It's almost a contamination by omission. by not correcting the record, by not putting out the correct information, by not correcting false information, misleading information, you're allowing the public to latch on to this bad information and create their own conclusions. And when you do an investigation, the one thing you want to do is set the record straight as early as possible and as accurately as possible, so that there is no misinformation.
So frequent appearances by law enforcement. You know,
Right.
the tragic case that just broke the news, I think it was, 2 days ago, about that little 5-year-old boy, 5 or 6-year-old boy, the one who disappeared. And it turns out that both parents were arrested and are now charged with his death. The body was found. But the reason that I'm mentioning it is that it was local law enforcement that immediately came. It was being announced. We're going to have the office or the official, a government official, was going to first talk, or either law or government official was first going to address the public at a press release, and followed by that FBI that had been called in since it was a disappeared child. And that's what it was done. And to their credit, I thought it was done very, very professionally, because it was extremely done very quickly afterwards that all of it broke out. So
and it set the record straight, and there wasn't no miscommunications, misleading information, and that's what we have to do with hate crimes, because people want to know what happened. If it's a hate crime, people want to know why it happened, who was targeted, and what law enforcement is doing about it. And you don't have to have a press conference to share that information. You can do it on a very local level, at the precinct, at churches, in community recreational centers.
I want to make two more quick points, then we'll take a break.
Go ahead.
And when we come back after the break, we'll talk about measures of coping. The first piece that I wanted to talk earlier, I mentioned that in Florida they blew it, and in Sri Lanka there's indications that they blew it. But the blowing part, to me, I think tells me that aside from certain people or certain perhaps limited number of people looking at something and either not putting it on a high enough bin,
prioritizing
prioritizing it. But also it makes me wonder how much of a sharing there is with other agencies. For instance, you have something happens locally here. To what extent does it get communicated to state police, FBI? It's not my area in terms of really knowing what would be the hierarchy of who should be notified. But I'm reasonably sure that, you have somebody commits a crime here, and there's some thought that maybe the person took off and went to Florida, that Florida should be notified. So how this communication takes place, I'm wondering if it's something that should become more systematic. And if there's a way of indicating or training or at least setting up a model that people say, yes, we are communicating, and these are the steps we take to increase the communication.
I think that in law enforcement, the protocol is to share information when there is a present and clear danger or threat of harm to someone in a community, such as an individual goes to Florida and we know that that person is targeting an individual in Florida. We would share information with the Florida law enforcement saying, hey, this person is coming to your state, your jurisdiction. They're targeting this person that lives there. So there's a clear and present danger and threat to an individual. The trickier part that law enforcement struggles with is when it's not as obvious. It's really harmless or ambiguous details that don't necessarily demonstrate a clear and present danger or risk, but have concern. You have concern about it because it sends a trend. It creates a trend where they might be going somewhere. And for law enforcement, that's a hard decision because when do you start sharing information? I personally believe, as a law enforcement official for 18 years, the presumption should be share the information. Yeah. We're all in the law enforcement community. We all have to work together. We're all on the same team. We have to share it and not withhold information until we believe it's an actionable.
Well, I love it when we have the Amber Alerts and the Silver
Right.
Alerts. I mean, I think that's a wonderful model.
It's redundant in many instances. It's may not always create a lead or may not be actionable, but I think it's necessary because if it prevents one death, if it prevents one act of violence, then it's worth it.
The one other issue I just wanted to touch upon, then we'll take a short break. Mm-hmm. How much of a desensitizing effect do you think we're experiencing when we are bombarded repeatedly with things in the news about this person insulted this type of person, be it because of a race or a religion or wearing blackface or who knows what. But this type of insensitivity that I'm seeing a lot in the news, and I'm seeing a lot of people they're making comparisons with the way I was treated is comparable to how Christ was treated. Mm-hmm. No names mentioned. Mm-hmm. But to what extent is this desensitize us, and we're almost taking it for the norm? And so what?
See, that's the point.
Where do you bother?
Yeah.
Why bother? And where do you bother? And then if you say something, somebody's going to say you're an idiot for saying it.
Right. I mean, and that's really the issue. Is that it's a process of normalizing a behavior and type of hate communication and hate, violence and stuff like that, or even discrimination. And the normalizing of it is so dangerous. We should always be very offended, very taken back by individuals who would offend other people, say things that are offensive, insensitive, and they call it, oh, you're being too politically correct, and that's not the case at all. What it is you're being sensitive towards the feelings and the concerns of others. You're being polite. You're being courteous. These are the baseline civilization skills that we need to readapt: is being courteous, being civil, being respectful, and not to say engage in this offensive communication, offensive, name calling and things like that, because then it starts normalizing that type of behavior, and that becomes the new standard of our society.
But you can be civil, courteous, and respectful, and on the inside, racist.
You can.
You're just not showing it. And how do you change that? And we're going to get back to that a little bit later, because I think we really
question.
need to work with the children.
Yeah,
we have to go to the children
as early as possible.
We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. So it's going good.
Going good.
¿Qué te parece?
Sigue en sintonía de nuestra programación.
La Tribuna Hispana USA es el periódico para los que leemos en español. En circulación desde 1988 en Long Island y New York City. Contamos con diferentes ediciones por zonas, impresas y digitales, donde usted puede leer las últimas noticias nacionales, internacionales y publicar sus anuncios para la comunidad. Atención empresarios, comerciantes y profesionales. Si usted desea aumentar sus ventas, llame ahora mismo al 1-888-900-2811, extensión 4, o visítenos en el www.latribunahispana.com.
We try to make the office more of a family type.
The office here is amazing. The staff here is amazing. Everybody makes you feel welcome. There's nobody who doesn't make you feel uncomfortable.
We do no-fault accidents. We do work-related slip and falls, major meds, sports-related injuries. So we do a lot of different. We just don't treat just one type of individual. I want to treat the patient. I want the patient to get better and have a good experience in my office. It's not all about the money. It's about the patient getting better.
Escucha Tribuna Radio las 24 horas del día. Tribuna Radio desde cualquier lugar del mundo. Tribuna Radio en el www.tribunaradio.us. Tribuna Radio, la música que quieres escuchar. Tribuna Radio, la mejor programación. Tribuna Radio, programas de entrevistas. Para más información, llámanos al 1-888-900-2811, extensión 5, o escríbenos a cels@tribunaradio.us.
Tribuna TV. Te invita a, si quieres ser el productor de tu propio programa de televisión, para así formar parte de la programación de Tribuna TV, rentando tu espacio en nuestra programación, como lo han hecho nuestros productores asociados. Para más información, llámanos al 1-888-928-11, extensión 7, o visítanos en la web al www.tribunatv.us.
Sigue en sintonía de nuestra programación.
Okay, we're back with my guest, attorney Jose Nieves. We talked throughout the show about different types of hate crimes,
Right.
different types of bias-related crimes. I showed some statistics, particular groups that were most targeted. We talked about some of the impact nationally as well as internationally. We also were beginning to look at some things that law enforcement does and measures that can be taken, different contexts, different areas that need to be focused on in terms of violence prevention, changing people's behavior,
Right.
and intervening to prevent violence, and certainly intervention after some sort of a violent act occurs. And significantly, you were talking really about incident debriefing. You didn't use the word, but I think that's
That's
what you're
exactly what
referring
it
to.
is.
Incident debriefing, and what can you learn? It's regrettable that something horrific happens, but you do need to learn from it, and you need to learn from it so that you can try to do something more effectively and prevent a further recurrence. Oscar, ¿me puede poner slide 6?
Safe.
Slide 6, el último slide. So, very briefly, this is extremely a simplified list of steps that can be taken. It's, certainly can be much more complex. I gave examples of measures that could be taken when you want to protect a synagogue, a church, a mosque, things that you need to consider at a mall or at a sports arena or a multimedia location and so forth. But here we were talking about maintaining contact with police, religious institutions, other agencies, so sort of like a collaborative effort so that information is shared.
Right.
There's a sense of camaraderie, support, trust. You want to have trust. If people don't trust the police for whatever reason, they're not going to call them.
Right.
Implement safety measures for children. We didn't talk about children, but children, parents take them to events, to activities, to malls. Sometimes the child walks around loose in a huge mall, or what are the things that can be done to safeguard the children in different settings, different locations.
Right.
Routinely inspect areas that may be vulnerable. Again, here we're looking at different settings, different contexts. Increase security measures during special occasions, like obviously now Easter Sunday. We have other holidays coming up around the corner. We have Memorial Days around the corner.
That's right.
a huge win, and we have Fifth Avenue, people parading down the hall of the Walk of Heroes and all of that. That's a major occasion. So special kinds of occasions. I know that Flushing Meadow Park every now and then they have special events. You have the Puerto Rican parade, St. Patrick's Day parades.
You have cultural
so these
festivals.
are special occasions. And of course, in the aftermath of threats, we're seeing this right now after Sri Lanka and certainly after New Zealand and other violent incidents. So I wanted to sort of get back to this and talk about any other kinds of measures that you think. I know that, like, for instance, as a psychologist, when we're talking about things like bullying in schools, there are school psychologists, social workers, mental health people, teachers that need to focus on this, and they need to look at this kind of behavior. And what do you do with it? Who do you communicate? What contact do you have with the parents? What outreach do you have with the parents? What do you teach children about bullying?
Right.
What do you teach the younger children? So this is something that, as a psychologist, I might do or look at in terms of a school setting. What about gun violence? Do you look at people that are in schools and they start cutting class? They were expelled from school. Social media. Why would you ignore threats on social media?
That would be horrible. I mean, to do that is reckless for law enforcement. I think if once they're put on notice of it, as a candidate for district attorney and having been in the law enforcement field and law enforcement space for over 18 years. I believe there's certain things.
I have an office in Queens, I confess. I live in Suffolk. I have an office in Suffolk. I have an office in Nassau. I also have an office in Queens, and I want to be safe in my office.
And it's so important. It's so important. And from the
and we've had professional. I'm sort of kidding a little bit here, but there are professionals who have been the victims of violence, including psychologists, peers of mine.
Right.
I've learned there have been people have come into their buildings and have killed them. Right. So safety certainly is, even for the professionals. Obviously, it's something very important.
Public safety is paramount. And from a district attorney's perspective, what we can do and what I hope to do as the next district attorney of Queens County is create a environment where it's a culture of trust, a culture of respect in the community. This is when, like the top thing, maintain police, communication with police, religious institutions and other agencies. This is what we mean by that. Making sure that the DA is so intact and in connection with the public, with the religious leaders, with the community leaders, that they know and that we all know that it's going to be an atmosphere of respect, an atmosphere of tolerance, and an atmosphere of cooperation when it comes to hate crimes, identifying the behavior before it becomes a tragedy.
Well, as a hypothetical, it's your first day as Queens DA. What do you do?
First thing that we're going to do as the district attorney's office is create a very robust hate crimes unit.
You wouldn't have a celebration party on the first day?
No, it's to work, right to work. Right after the elections, we're going into work. We're creating a hate crimes unit, and it's going to be staffed with specially trained prosecutors and investigators.
So that's a high priority for you?
Very much so. And it has to be specially trained prosecutors and investigators, because when an incident happens, you cannot wait for information to be collected. You have to be very proactive.
What are some of the ethnic population? Because Queens is hugely
it's a multicultural, multicultural county. Speaks over 200 languages. Countries all around the world are represented in significant numbers, and I think that diversity within the DA's office makes that easier to understand the cultural diversity of the county. That's why the second thing I'm going to do is make sure that the office is diverse. Make sure we have a diverse staff of attorneys, investigators, and support staff. That way, when something happens, we can culturally be sensitive to the situation, we can be responsive to the community, and once we create this open line of communication between law enforcement, the district attorney's office, the police department, and local leaders, whether it be religious leaders or community leaders, once we create that lines of communication, then this becomes a lot easier. Maintaining that safety, that public safety that we need, becomes a very obtainable task, an obtainable goal.
And in the police academy, I know that there have been occasions that I've done evaluations. I've intervened in police officer candidates, psychological evaluation, and I've never seen anything in the material that's been turned over to me. There's never been anything in there about questions about hate or bias crimes. I've seen things like, have you been, the victim of domestic violence or sex abuse? Have you committed crimes? Were you stopped? Did you lose your license? I mean, I've seen a very robust set of questions, but I've never seen anything about, as a hypothetical, how would you intervene if, you stop somebody, different color, or the person curses at you and uses profanity towards you, or says, uses an offensive language to you. So I'm wondering, that would obviously be at the application phase, but I'm also wondering, police academy, is this something that can be done a little bit, or is it being done?
It is being done. It is being done. Through their implicit bias training, they've identified ways of bringing out,
it's
in
six
the
months,
cadets.
right?
It's 6 months, and the implicit bias training is very good. I've taken the implicit bias training of the NYPD. The instructors are all law enforcement, senior law enforcement officials that come in and they teach about how we all walk around with biases and how we need to check our biases, and we need to be very mindful of why we're making the decisions we're making. Is it because of presumptions that we're making based on our own biases, or is it because of facts, hard facts, what we see, what we hear, what's going on around us? And that's what law enforcement needs to do more of, is to try to engage in that cultural sensitivity training, implicit bias training, so that they're more effective. They're reacting not to their own preconceived ideas and presumptions and biases, but they're reacting to hard facts. What is the person saying? What is the person doing? What's the environment presenting?
What about the notion of forgiveness to youthful offenders, some of the people that come out of Rikers having committed really not horrific crimes.
No, not violent
They're
crimes.
coming out. They don't have much, or they have less education, limited opportunities, financial limitations, and then they get into trouble. It's like they're discarded by society. They're treated like outcasts, like people with leprosy. And I'm wondering to what extent, giving second chances and things like that would help prevent somebody like this from going forward in the future and becoming a more hardened criminal and avoiding that revolving door syndrome of going back into the jail system and the prison system.
I mean, that's my philosophy of prosecution, embracing people instead of creating an underclass of outcasts. Embracing an individual who makes some mistakes, who does something wrong, teaching them the error of their ways, and then reintegrating them into community, reintegrating them into society. Because once you could put somebody in a situation where they have a criminal conviction and they have a criminal record, now they've been prohibited. You basically barred them from certain types of employment. You barred them from certain types of licenses, education, housing, economic opportunity. It's just so permanent and it's so widespread. It should be done only in the most necessary cases. And when you should be diverting people from the criminal justice system, helping them address whatever the issues is that's the underlying driver of the misconduct, and then re-embracing them into the community, helping them learn from their mistakes, and then getting them back as a productive member of society. One of the things I'm going to do as district attorney specifically is have a post-sentencing unit where individuals, a post-sentencing unit.
Oh, okay.
So after they've been sentenced, after they're incarcerated, to try to identify these individuals who are going to be released into our community 6 months before they're released into our community. And then what we're going to do is we're going to connect them to the services that they need.
And/or diversion?
No, connect them to services that they need, such as mental health services, such as drug addiction services, such as getting an ID, getting a simple bank account, getting a job, getting housing. Because when they're released from
That's
incarceration,
part of risk management.
Exactly.
That's a risk management model.
And then what you do is you drive down recidivism, because when you create opportunity for the individuals who were previously incarcerated, and you allow them the opportunity to reintegrate into society, become a returning citizen, and reintegrate into society, then the likelihood of recidivism drops precipitously. It drops greatly because they have an opportunity to go on with their life.
I think also it's a wonderful opportunity for some of these people to become motivational speakers, like actually inviting them to come with the cop,
yeah,
or the attorney to a school and telling their story and how they got out of it and what they're doing. At this point in time, it puts a smile on their face.
Absolutely.
And it encourages other people who are seeing what presumably looks like a peer tell their stories.
And the most important part about that is we're reaching out to the younger generation. And one of the things that I want to do as district attorney in Queens County is put my district attorneys into schools, not in a situation where they're doing law enforcement, but they're doing education. We should be talking about bias crime in elementary schools. This is what bias crimes is. This is how the law prohibits targeting of an individual based on a characteristic, and this is what would be the result if somebody did that. So let's go into these schools and create scenario-based training where we tell them, what happened if this person said this and hit this person because of the way it looked? Would that be a bias crime? And we talk about it in a very normal, matter-of-fact way where the kids are learning, wait a minute, this is something that I need to be careful about.
That's psychoeducational.
Exactly. But it's done at a very early stage. So my district attorneys will be going into the elementary schools and the high schools to be engaging in that type of instruction, because it shouldn't be that the first time these kids hear about law enforcement is when someone in their family or they know
street law
is arrested.
You're teaching them also a little bit about street law.
Exactly, and know their rights and know what bias crimes is and what's
not to run away from a cop necessarily. Some of the things that you need to do to try to protect yourself. We're coming to the end. I did want to at least tell the viewers there some of the things that you can do to be safer, and certainly with your children. Make sure you know where they are, who their friends are, who their teachers are, what shows they watch on TV, what they're doing on the computer. There are so many things that you can do to keep your children safe, and make sure that you have curfews that keep the curfew. If it's 1 a.m., that's not 2 a.m. 1 a.m. is 1 a.m. I did want to say that one of the shows I'm going to be doing shortly in the near future will be a open mic. Call in, where I will invite viewers to call and ask any questions they have about their concerns. Maybe a depressed parent or depressed family member or a problem with their kid in school. Open mic, you'll be able to call, and I'll give you some answer to the extent that I'm able to, because it's not therapy on the air. So. Without further ado, I wanted to indicate that this show will be recorded and available to you on Facebook, on Tribuna TV, Vimeo, and YouTube starting tomorrow. So feel free to watch it. And the election is when?
So to all the Queens residences, please vote June 25th. June 25th, and you can go on my website at Nieves for Queens DA. I'm also on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube. So you can just Google search me at Jose Nieves, and it's Nieves for Queens DA. June 25th of this year is the election.
So thank you so much for being here.
I appreciate it.
Oscar, un gran placer. Tú siempre me ayudas mucho. Thank you all viewers. I hope that this is a benefit to you. Again, it's recorded, so you'll be able to pause it at different slides and review it at your leisure. So I wish all of you to be very, very safe. Be careful out there, okay? Thank you and good night.
Good night.